Welcome to Stepping Toward Justice with me, Sarah A. Ford, a podcast where we'll explore what justice really looks like inside of a courtroom, outside in our communities, and where access to justice is lacking. We'll talk with advocates, survivors, and changemakers working to make justice a reality for us all. We can't change what we don't understand or acknowledge, so let's take a step together towards justice. Well, welcome back to Stepping Toward Justice. I have got an amazing lady with me here today, the incredible Vicki Ringer, who is the Director of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood here in South Carolina. Vicki, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
I am so glad to see you here today and get to talk to you. I feel like every time I see you up at the State House or something, it's like always chaos going on, and you're like handling all the things. So it's great to talk to you.
Thanks. It feels like it's a break in the middle of a storm after this year's legislative session.
It's been a hell of a year, huh?
It has been for everybody and on so many issues, and none of them that have made South Carolina a better state, not one.
It's, obviously school choice has been an interesting an interesting one. The 6-week abortion ban, again, I know it feels like whack-a-mole for you dealing with that issue. Why do we keep going over the same thing over and over again?
Well, that's a big question. And you mentioned that 6-week abortion ban. The Supreme Court of South Carolina had just ruled in January of this year, not even 6 months ago, or exactly 6 months ago, that this was an unconstitutional law because it violates our right to privacy. But did that stop the legislature from moving forward? Not one bit, not one bit. So here we are again, deja vu.
It is. It's like over and over. And I want to say, is this the 4th time in the past couple of years that the legislature has tried to take up this issue?
Oh,
that seems like a huge waste of everybody's time. Like
every single year, even when Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, which stipulated that states cannot ban abortion prior to viability. Every year they would bring up a personhood bill, which says that a fertilized egg is a person. They brought up all sorts of abortion bans and restrictions, and even long before Roe was overturned. So every year that I've been at Planned Parenthood, and even before that, we've had to battle these bills. And I've been with Planned Parenthood 7 years. And in fact, I learned that the personhood bill has been introduced for 25 straight years. 25 years.
Wow.
That goes to show their persistence, but also you feel like you're just hitting your head against a concrete wall, taking up a personhood bill. That gives more agency to a fertilized egg than it does to the woman who's pregnant.
It's astounding to me because it dominates the legislative session. And there's, I certainly know that everyone does not agree on the abortion issue. I get that. But there are so many important issues that affect the state of South Carolina that we're just ignoring in favor of this particular issue. And that's just mind-boggling to me. There's so many things that our legislators could be doing. I don't get it. That must be so frustrating for you up there.
It is. And in fact, I started this some time ago, and if for no other reason than it makes me feel better to be able to tell legislators what they should be doing instead of what they are doing. I have a 10-page document that lists all of the things where South Carolina is ranked. And there is not anything where we are the top of the list and we're proud of it. We are in the bottom of everything. Maternal mortality,
yes.
Infant mortality. They say they want to save the babies, but yet we have the 5th highest infant mortality rate in the nation. That's children that die within the first year of their birth. and that's the fifth highest. Shouldn't we be doing something to save these women and their babies? But no, let's ban abortion. That's not going to save anything, as we know. Even before Roe, before abortion was legal, women found a way. They will go out of state, they will travel wherever they can, they will self induce an abortion. Thankfully, today we do have medication abortion, but that didn't exist prior to 1973. So women were taking drastic measures back then to self induce abortion, and women died. And so I have to wonder, is that in our future again? Women, particularly if this mifepristone case is successful and that's taken off the market, just what will women do to end a pregnancy that they don't want?
And it's one of those things that it disproportionately affects our Black and brown communities, people who are living in poverty, people, who we should be looking to help and protect. And yet these laws that ban abortion, just, it's astounding to me that we've heard so many people, legislators even, and, U.S. senators who've had affairs or mistresses, and they made sure that they had an abortion. But people whose lives will be drastically affected by this are unable to do so because of these laws. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to me knowing that there are so many counties in South Carolina where we don't even have OBGYNs to care for these women and their babies. I mean, you would know every statistic about this issue in South Carolina. So I certainly won't try to pull it out of my head, but what is it, about 15 or 16 counties that don't have an OBGYN in South Carolina?
That's right. It's 14. And
14.
in fact, we're seeing hospital labor and delivery units close down because they don't have OBGYNs willing to deliver babies there anymore. And in fact, without expanding Medicaid in South Carolina, some of the hospitals in smaller communities have had to close because they can't remain open because most of their residents are poor. And so if they don't have Medicaid to help pay for their hospital bills, then the hospitals can't remain open. I think we've had 3 hospitals close within the last 10 years, and others are merging. You've got the big hospitals that are expanding, but that doesn't help in these poor communities, not at all.
Rural communities.
If you live in a rural community and you get pregnant, you're going to have to likely travel an hour or more to make a regular visit to an OBGYN and just as far to get to a hospital. Now, if you're going into active labor, the last thing you want to do is be in a car for an hour. That is, even if you have a car or you have somebody with a car who can take you. So that's part of the reason why we have the high maternal mortality rates, is because our entire healthcare system is inadequate for the rural areas of this state. And instead of, trying to build that up, entice more OBGYNs to come here, provide better rural health care, they're scaring OBGYNs away. We're seeing this in states that have banned abortion. They want all these babies to be born, but there's nobody there to deliver them.
Gosh, it's you talking about mothers having to drive an hour, if they're lucky to get to a hospital where their children can be delivered. I find in the work that I do, victims who have been sexually assaulted oftentimes have to drive an hour or more to a hospital where they can get a sexual assault examination or forensic examination. And so we're really in dire straits here in South Carolina and beyond with our healthcare system because we're not adequately caring for the most vulnerable of our communities. And it's just, it has devastating consequences. Like you were talking about, fifth in infant mortality. I mean, that's horrific in 2023, that we're on par with countries that people would be shocked that we're on par with infant and maternal mortality.
Yeah, in fact, there's quite a few. Even Mexico has bet takes care of its women and children better than the United States. For all of the complaints about Mexico and Mexicans traveling to the United States, they do take better care of women and children than we do. But you mentioned the victims that you work with. That's another area of abortion law that has
Yes.
been so frustrating. Some of these hospitals don't want to provide the morning after pill, as it's called, or emergency contraceptives, because they consider them an abortifacient, which they're not.
Right.
Plan B is a medicine that just simply stops ovulation. It's like a heavier dose of a normal birth control pill. But
Right.
we're seeing reproductive coercion take a big role in abortion laws. And in fact, I spoke with someone yesterday who heads up a home for domestic abuse survivors, women who have gotten out. And we talked about how abusers themselves will try to make their partners pregnant because then they feel stuck in those circumstances. And then for victims of rape and incest, they have to report to law enforcement. Talk about taking autonomy away from women.
Yes.
And we already know the problems that come with reporting and why women don't do it. And it's completely understandable. But it's something lawmakers just don't get. When we've talked about a 10-year-old victim of incest who was raped by her uncle, because she was raped by her uncle, her mother would not give consent for her to get an abortion because she didn't want to get her brother in trouble. She told her daughter, just stay away from him. Well, needless to say, her parental rights have been terminated. But when a doctor was talking about pediatric victims that she treats, one of the legislators said, oh, that's just rare. That doesn't happen.
It's
And she
not.
said, it happens every single day in South Carolina. I have one of these patients who is too young to understand what's happening to her in my office every single week, who needs an abortion because her body is too small and too underdeveloped to be able to carry a pregnancy
Devastating.
to term. And he just didn't believe it.
It's as a former prosecutor, I have prosecuted cases of incest and sexual assault. And I think people think those things are things that don't happen anymore, but they do. They are happening. And us pretending that they're not is not serving our most vulnerable people, the people who need us to support them. And I can't even tell you how infuriated I've been when I read the 6-week abortion ban law requiring victims to report. As a victims' rights lawyer, I think it's a huge violation of victims' constitutional rights to be treated with fairness and dignity and respect. But certainly it's just another form of state-sanctioned abuse, because we see that domestic violence is not just bruises, but it's financial control, emotional, coercive control, reproductive coercion. And by forcing victims, by taking their autonomy, by taking their choice away from them and whether they report or not, the state is basically in a place of abuse or a place of power over this victim. And it is absolutely devastating. As someone who works with victims and you supporting victims and women every single day, it's just,
You're
I
exactly
want to
right.
bang my head against the wall. I really do.
And instead of trying to make those laws better, we're still debating whether domestic abusers ought to be able to have a gun. You know,
Right.
come on. Let's get with the 2023 maybe, you know. And as somebody who works directly with those victims, I just can't imagine what it must feel like to have all of your independence taken away from you and to be victimized once, but then have the state victimize you again,
Right.
and be forced to carry a pregnancy to term that's the result of a violent crime against you. Or it doesn't even have to be violent. In fact,
No.
that's a big part of it, that when lawmakers don't understand, is that they think, well, why isn't she got marks all over her from fighting? Did she scream? Did she fight back? No, she did her best to stay alive, whatever it
Right.
took, and to
Right.
avoid another beating.
Right. It's alarming to me how folks just cannot understand that. And those are the people who are in control and power over making these laws that affect so many people. And it's, these things are not rare. These are not things that, they happen in every community, in, every church, every neighborhood, every socioeconomic background, educational, everything you can think of. These are not things that happen to other people. They're happening among us and with us. And just choosing to take any sort of power and control away from these victims. I'm a huge advocate for victim-centered lawyering, victims, listening to victims' voices, elevating victims' voices. And it's very disheartening to see our South Carolina state legislature and legislators across the country not getting that at all. It's like, what do
Oh,
we do?
absolutely right. And, one thing that I complain about every year is that people show up one by the dozens to tell their personal stories. And
Yes.
it's as if we have to open a vein and pour out all of our most sacred secrets in order to tell our stories to legislators and beg them not to pass these laws that will have a detrimental effect on me and others in my same circumstance. And it goes in one ear and out the other. In fact, I spoke with someone earlier today who had just gotten a terrible diagnosis for a fetal anomaly, no chance of survival, but it fell right into that no man's land. The bill had been passed, the 6-week ban, but it was before the governor had signed it. And the hospital told her, we don't know when the governor will sign this, when it will become effective, and we don't want you to be caught up in the middle. She had to fly to another state to get care, taken away from her emotional network, her
Right.
support system, her doctor, the hospital near her, to get care for a baby that will not survive. And that's just cruel. Already she's devastated
Heartbreaking.
because this was a very wanted pregnancy. So it impacts those too. But others will make judgment and say, oh, but didn't you want to deliver and hold your dead baby? Well, maybe some do,
Sure.
but not everyone does. I know I would not. That would be even more heartbreaking to
Right.
me. But cruelty is the point, and I say that frequently.
It's just astounding that we think, seeing what we're seeing, and I know that you have a front row seat to this up at the State House and all the work that you do, but seeing us regress where women's choice, women's rights seem to be taking a step backwards instead of a step forward. And it's really, for those of us that pay attention, and we should all be paying attention, it's disheartening, but you keep showing up, Vicki Ringer. You keep doing the work. how can, what do you say to people who are like, I don't know what to do? I know that I'm not okay with what's happening. What can we do to get our voices out there and support the work that you're doing?
Well, one of the things that I remind everybody is if you believe that government should stay out of these personal decisions, you are in the majority. So don't
Mhm.
feel embarrassed by that or that you have to keep that a secret, because it's interesting that people will come up to me and whisper, I support abortion rights, because they don't know who's around, who's listening, who will judge them. But we're the majority.
Mhm.
So I would tell people, talk to your friends, ask them how they feel about it, and join a group. Reach out to your legislators. That's a key thing. And just have that conversation. I know how you've been voting, and I'm very disappointed. And we are opposed to that vote. We are the majority. And you are voting against the best interests of women, children, and families in our state. It's always good to talk to legislators. And people think that legislators are these big, important people. They're just like us. They
Mhm.
pretend to be big and important, but they just happen to have enough ambition and enough resources to run for office. Um, but have conversations with them. You probably go to church with some. You show up at the grocery store and you run into them. Your kids play ball together. There's all sorts of places where you run into these folks in your community. And then show up to the State House. Come to
Yeah.
a committee meeting where they're discussing these bills. And it doesn't have to be abortion, it can be about birth control. Representative Nancy Mace said on CNN or Fox News recently that we should find the middle ground on reproductive laws. And let's start with birth control. Birth control is the middle ground. And I'm like, no, birth control is not middle ground. Birth control is the very basic.
Right.
We should all be in agreement on that. That shouldn't be considered middle ground. But that's just where thought processes are. People just haven't been informed. But speaking of birth control, we know that that's where this is going to go next.
Mhm.
Same folks who want to ban abortion do want to ban birth control, and they consider any type of hormonal birth control to be a form of abortion. And that just defies science. It's just not correct at all.
I need to take a sip of my Diet Mountain Dew on that note, Vicki, because it's just
I unpacked a lot there, I know, and it is kind of crazy because one thing leads to another. And
Mhm.
the first I'd heard of this was an interview that the director of the National Students Right to Life or something organization, um, their director was on TV one Saturday morning, and they were talking about abortion. And um, I think it was Joy Reid that interviewed her, and she said, "But you believe we should have." Joy said we should have greater sex education and access to contraceptives, and that woman did this, and Joy said, "You don't believe in birth control?" And she said, "No, birth control is an abortifacient." So I don't know what they want. I think they want more babies to be born.
But what do
I
we do when
have
they're born?
heard that.
We're not treating
Yeah.
the ones we've got with respect. My gosh.
Well, and
Lord
we
have
see
mercy.
that a lot, that it is more forced birth than pro-life.
Right.
The pro-life moniker just doesn't fit. And as we've often said, and Philip frequently quotes the nun who said, don't tell me you're pro-life and you only care about the babies being born. You don't care about them being fed or housed or educated or clothed. All of that is taken into consideration
That
before
is
you can
crazy.
say you're pro-life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, well, it's something that I've chatted with my brother Phil, chatted with him about recently is when I was in high school, I was a student um, for life, pro life. I was completely pro life, raised Catholic,
Sure.
um, and I even had one of those small fetuses that the little plastic, and I was um, go to rallies, different things like that. I've always been very active in these sort of conversations, and as I grew up, realizing everyone doesn't live the same way that I do, has had the same advantages that I have, the same access to healthcare, education, you start to learn things. And I think that for me, I am absolutely pro choice now because of the life that I've lived and the experience and being educated on these topics. And so I'm so grateful for you doing the work, telling people, educating all of us on what this stuff really means, because we think we know, but do we really know? And I always look at, what does the data show? What does the data show us? And the data shows us that women and families need access to adequate health care, and they're just not getting
Absolutely.
it. They're just not
Well,
getting
and
it.
something you that we don't know as young people are the nuances that
Mhm.
go into making decisions about abortion. Um, there are always the exceptions. When you start talking to people who say they are opposed to abortion, and you ask them, well, what do you think about rape victims? Well, they should be able to get an abortion. What do you think about children? Well, they should be able to get an abortion. What if a woman has eclampsia and is actively dying? Well, they should, of course, get an abortion. So you find out that they're not totally opposed. But then we also know those exceptions rarely work in real life, just as we talked about the exception for rape and incest victims. Um, yes, you can get an abortion, but you have to report it to law enforcement. And for many women, that puts them at greater risk for fear that their partner will find out.
Right. And I think what I see from our legislators is that they don't understand the investigative process. If I go and report today that I have been the victim of sexual assault, and I am now pregnant, it may take weeks or months for that perpetrator to be investigated, to be charged. What if I'm living with the perpetrator, with the offender? What do you do in that instance? It just really puts people who are already in a huge disadvantage here just in even more dangerous situations. And I think that that's just the opposite of what our states and governments and our legislators need to be doing.
Well, and one of the things that you talked about the data, um, a study that came out of the University of California at Davis, they referred to it as the Turnaway Study and
Mhm.
published a book about it. They studied several thousand women over 10 years who had had abortions or who had wanted abortions and been denied one for whatever reason. They were too far along, they were too young, and their parents wouldn't give consent. Um, for whatever, they couldn't afford it. For whatever reason, they could not get a desired abortion. And despite the other side talking about women regretting their decision, they found that 95% of women who'd had an abortion did not regret for 1 minute their decision to have an abortion. They knew it was best for them at the moment. And at 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, they did not regret it. And they learned that regardless of the reason that they chose to have an abortion, those women had had more successful lives in terms of finishing their school, starting a career that made them financially stable, forming a long term partnership, and going on to have other children. The other group people who had been denied abortions, and this is not across the board, not stereotypical, but the majority of them had not finished their education, had faced greater rates of poverty because they were young, uneducated, and now with a child. They had had trouble with long-term relationships because it's a single mom with a child, most likely. But that goes against the narrative that the other side gives, that women will regret it, that women will have greater risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, mental health problems, suicidal tendencies. The studies have just blown all of those beliefs out of the water. Those claims about greater risk of cancer or mental health disease for women who've had an abortion just aren't true. And they do a huge disservice to the whole issue of health care. There's enough reasons or non-reasons why we have breast cancer. It has certainly impacted nearly every woman in my family, but you don't equate that with abortion. That's just so unfair. And it hurts our research on breast cancer.
We're going to take a quick break because I need to get another Diet Mountain Dew. But there's a lot more for us to talk about. We'll be right back with Vicki Ringer.
Okay.
All right, well, we are back, y'all. We are talking with Vicki Ringer, who is the Director of Public Affairs with Planned Parenthood here in South Carolina. Vicki, one thing that, we've been talking about a lot. We've been talking about abortion. We've been talking about victims and access to health care, which to me is access to justice in their own lives. How do you think, we were talking about how it starts with abortion, then it goes to birth control. What about the fertility world? A lot of times folks, who are unable to conceive or have difficulty, this seems like it's going up in that neighborhood. And that's really, really scary.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. And I'm glad you brought that up because it not only impacts people that don't want children, but it impacts those who do. And I would dare say that all of us know somebody who has used IVF or in vitro fertilization to conceive and have a baby. For whatever reason, I deal with people who are very fertile, more fertile than they want to be. But I also have very dear friends who tried, and there is nothing more heartbreaking than people that want to have children and can't. But IVF, just to kind of lay the groundwork, is where you retrieve eggs from a woman and sperm from a man, and you mix them together in a petri dish. I know I'm simplifying that, and these reproductive endocrinologists, who are generally the specialists at IVF, are probably cringing right now, saying, Vicki, not like that at all. But those are the basics.
Generally
speaking, outside of a body.
Right.
And then the fertilized egg will be reimplanted in a woman. And that has become very mainstream these days. We've had one of the top IVF specialists in the state speak to legislators, and he has quite simply said, the minute you define a fertilized egg as a person with all of the constitutional rights as a living, breathing person, he said, I can't practice IVF anymore because I could be charged with murder for every single egg that I have in a petri dish, in storage. If I have a power outage or I drop something, I could be charged with murder. And the cost to me, my freedom, my livelihood is just too great. And people that, um, in fact, there was an article, I think, in the USA Today in the past several weeks from a woman who said, I wanted a baby and how IVF saved me, but how abortion laws could take that right away. And she told that exact story that these abortion laws have much wider consequences than most people think they do.
They really do. It's one of those things. It's like a, tentacles that, it goes over here and it goes over here and it goes over here and it just keeps, where does it end? Where does it stop?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is very widespread, and it's pretty sad for people who are trying to
Yes.
have a baby or expand their family. And then for those, we see this already, but one of my friends who used IVF just so happened to be a Black woman who also had an at-risk pregnancy. She's tiny. She had trouble getting pregnant. And when we say that there's bias in the medical system against Black and brown people, that's true. And we saw it with her. She kept telling the doctor and the nurse that she didn't feel well, that she was in pain, something didn't feel right. And they said, well, you just gave birth. Of course you don't feel good. And then she just passed out. And her husband had to go out into the hall and scream for somebody to come help her. And she was rushed to emergency surgery. She was bleeding to death. So it's not just, and they had the best insurance, the best health care, and yet they didn't believe her when she said, I don't feel right. And instead of checking her out, they just patted her on the head and said,
Right.
oh, don't you never mind about that.
Well, it's like Serena Williams has very publicly talked about her struggles, and we had Tori, is it Bowie? I think who passed away in May in the midst of her labor. Both African American women who ran into issues in the midst of their labor and were not taken, their concerns, their pain was not taken seriously, to the point where this decorated Olympian is dead now. It's just
that
alarming.
was so tragic. To know that and it happened at home. She was alone, and thinking about how scared she must have been, knowing that she was in pain and that something was wrong and she couldn't get to help. And that's what we say about pregnancy is not a benign condition. And that's something that Dr. Dawn Bingham, who's head of ACOG in South Carolina, says frequently. Pregnancy is not a benign condition.
No.
It affects every part of your body, all of your organs, all of your systems. And we also know, because of the maternal mortality rate, pregnancy is 14 times more dangerous than an abortion. But yet all you hear about is the dangers of abortion. In my 7 years at Planned Parenthood, I'm not aware of a single person who has had tragic consequences from an abortion. But my great-grandmother died during childbirth. My best friend's sister died during childbirth, generations apart. So it's not just something that happened in the old days. It happens now. And that's because so many things can go wrong. And what we frequently hear about is eclampsia or really high blood pressure. And women who are monitored regularly for their blood pressure, we get tests for sugar, glucose tests, because gestational diabetes is such a big concern. I know my own daughter, because I'm a grandmother now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I kept saying, I'm not old enough to be a grandmother. And then I looked around and I said, yeah, I kind of am. When my grandmother was my age now, I was 20. So um, I started late and Sally started later too. But I digress. But she had problems in the beginning, just being sick all the time. And she thought, if all 9 months are going to be like this, I'm just not ever doing this again. And that's what a lot of what women go through, even with easy pregnancies. It's never easy. It's
Right.
never easy. And that's really where our legislators should be focusing their times. How can we make healthcare more available with greater access, so that people who have chronic health problems, and we know that people do in South Carolina, we're in the top 10 for diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity. Um, you name a chronic illness, and we're in the top
We
10.
got it. Mm.
Lack of insurance, lack of access to a primary care provider. We didn't expand Medicaid. That's a big deal. All of those things play into making sure people are healthy when they get pregnant, which increases the opportunities for healthy pregnancies. So it's a vicious cycle. You can't just ban abortion and think you fixed anything. You haven't.
Right.
People aren't not having abortions because it's been banned. They're just changing geography. They'll go to another state. And we have some great abortion funds in South Carolina, which are paying for women to go to other states, paying for them to, when available, stay here in South Carolina. And right now they can, because our law has been enjoined. Um, but there are women that work at hourly jobs. If they don't work, they don't get paid. They don't
Right.
have paid time off like many of us do. They don't have sick leave like many of us do. And 60% of all women who have abortions already have a child. So they know what's involved to take care of a child financially, emotionally, physically. And so they've got to find childcare,
Right.
uh, not get paid, pay for a procedure, and find transportation to their nearest abortion clinic. So already you're putting working women, low income women at greater risk than anyone else. So thankfully for the abortion funds, they've really stepped up. And if people want to help, that's a way they can help, is to donate to abortion funds, which help women who can't afford it find the care that they need or want.
Right. Now, speaking of the legislation that was signed into law and then was immediately appealed, there's going to be hearing on that the end of June, correct?
That's right. June 27th, the state Supreme Court will hear this new 6-week ban, which the legislature has said, oh, it's so different from the old 6-week ban. So we're going to just see if
Mhm.
we can go ahead and pass it again. Well, what they're really hoping is that their new justice will be enough to overturn the January decision. Um, as I know, just a primer on our state Supreme Court. When our case was decided in January, the writer of the majority opinion, and it was a 3-2 decision, so it was
Right.
close, was Justice Kay Hearn. And because of the state's mandatory retirement age of 72, she had to retire. And in South Carolina, our legislators elect judges. the governor doesn't appoint them, the people don't elect them, as happened in most states. Legislators elect them. And so who did our legislators elect? The one man who was in consideration for the position, not the two women, but the one man. So now our Supreme Court is all male,
All men.
5 men. We are the only state in the nation with an all male high court, the only state. And I remind myself that Roe v. Wade was decided by all men because
True.
in 1973, we didn't have women on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I'm not saying men aren't capable of following the law and understanding the law or attempting to understand pregnancy, because they do their research, they do get it. It's just whenever you have representation of women, Black people, different ethnicities, you get a wider perspective of lived experiences, which can impact your decisions. If your only lens to see anything is the way you've lived your life, it's very easy to judge others who do something else. But once you've heard a story from the way somebody else has had to live their life, you don't unhear it. And you know that, as you said, once you learned that everybody didn't have the privileges you had growing up, I'm like that as well. I find when you really listen, you find out just how fortunate we've been, and that we've got to help others become more, have more access to the things we had. Let's not condemn those people because they're poor or that they don't have health care. Let's help them get that.
Exactly. You know, I after I graduated from college, I taught with Teach for America in inner city Charlotte, and it was the worst year of my life.
Oh,
it was
wow.
also the best year of my life because I learned so much teaching 8th grade science. Lord help me, those kids, 8th grade science. But also seeing these kids, seeing what they dealt with in their everyday life, expecting them to come into a classroom and sit down and be quiet. And when I had children living in cars, children who didn't have electricity and running water in their homes in the 2000s in Charlotte, North Carolina, it didn't make sense to me. But seeing that expanded my horizons, my understanding, and really helped shape the trajectory of my career as an attorney. Because it's when we don't have experience with people who are not like us, who don't have the same experiences, then we become very much siloed in a little box and think everyone is the same and has the same, and it's not the case. And so I'm so grateful to hear you talk about that and trying to expand some of our understanding and horizon with some of this information, because if we don't know, it's okay to not know, but it's not okay to say, I'm not going to listen. At least listen and hear.
You're absolutely right. And we see that play out in so many aspects of our life in South Carolina, and I'm sure in every state. The legislature has been on a rampage to do away with diversity, equity, and inclusion in colleges and in corporations, state agencies, that any type of work towards helping people understand those who are different from them, oh, well, that's racist. That's going after and appointing or promoting people who have less skills than others. No, it's just trying to get us all to a level playing field. And it's just like, I'm sure you heard the story about a Chapin High School student who complained about having the book Between You and Me by Coates taught in his school, because surely that's illegal. And it talks about racism and how he, as a Black man, had dealt with racism in this country. That is now illegal in South Carolina to teach our children about racism in schools. It boggles the mind. But it's that racism that plays into abortion, in healthcare, in schools, in jobs, in housing. Everything is a cycle, and you have to unwind it all to get at any level of any sense of equity whatsoever. We're a long way from that.
We sure are. We sure are. Vicki, I got to tell you, I had a list of things that I wanted to talk about, and I didn't even look at my list because we've just been chatting here. I hope you will come back and join me at some point because, it has been such a great conversation with you, talking about all of these different things and the work that you do, and, the fight that you do for all of us. It takes a very special person, and you are indeed an amazing woman, a strong woman. You make me proud to be a South Carolina gal, and I'm so grateful that I know that you are fighting for our rights up there at the State House, and just giving it your all as you do every day. So thank you for joining me, Vicki. You're the best.
Thank you, Sarah. That's very kind. And I love talking about this. I say it's not a job, it's a mission. And I know that I'm helping to make somebody's life better. And I'm always glad to talk about it and how people can get involved and help those who are less fortunate than we are. So please invite me back anytime. Happy to talk.
Thank you so much.